Okay. Next one that I wrote down is a mental health condition, schizophrenia. And we'll say any kind of psychosis, but schizophrenia.
Yeah. What we'd be looking for is probably with schizophrenia or psychosis, an inpatient stay. And I say that because if you are diagnosed, not necessarily with schizophrenia, like if it's a schizoaffective disorder, which is they kind of cross over into like a mood emotional disorder, but straight out schizophrenia, you're hearing things, you're seeing things, you're thinking things that aren't true. You've lost touch with reality. And psychosis is really, that's played out in some way. If they're psychotic, there's something that they're doing that a sane person would not do. And they will likely either be picked up by the police, or their family is so freaked out by their behavior that they call and have them institutionalized. So we'd be looking for any kind of psychotic episode from schizophrenia or from any kind of psychosis. We'd be looking for an inpatient stay. What we would be very careful to see is if it was induced by drugs or alcohol, because we see that a lot, that they're like, I had a psychotic episode and, I was, trying to stab my stepmother. It's like, oh my goodness. And you read the medical records and, he was high as a kite and he was trying to stab his stepmother. That's a really hard case to win, because, it's not so much a organic mental disorder. It's, substance abuse basically, sent you over the edge. But we'd be looking for that inpatient stay. Not always, but I'd say 90% of the time, if I didn't see that, I don't know if I'd want to take that case, because you rarely see ongoing mental health treatment with a therapist where they're saying, Mr. Smith is psychotic. It's like, are you allowing him in your office when he's psychotic? Because that means that he does not have a grasp on reality. He can be a harm to others, but more often he's going to be a harm to himself. He will maybe walk out in traffic. He might want to walk home. Well, he lives 10 miles away, but he wants to walk home. That's what a psychotic person would do, So we don't see that. I mean, you don't see medical records that are ongoing therapy where, Mr. Smith is suffering from psychosis. There can be times where there are episodes of psychosis, and they report them in the therapy notes. That the therapist says, I see a couple months ago you reporting that you saw some things that eventually you realize weren't there. Is that happening? Yeah, it happens every once in a while. We'd be expecting that for schizophrenia or psychosis, but not every time. Not every time you go in, because again, the therapist would likely sign off of this person needs an inpatient stay, kind of stabilize, bring them back to reality if they can. We would be looking for an antipsychotic medication. And in my humble opinion, and it is just my opinion, antipsychotic medication is probably that much better than the disease. A lot of times they say, the cure is worse than the disease. Well, the medication is a tiny bit better than the disease, but barely. The side effects of psychotic medication, schizophrenic medication, are severe. They're usually going to knock you out, or they're going to put you in a zombie-like state. I'm making a beeline to Seroquel. Seroquel is a very common medication for people who's they can't get to sleep because their mind's racing all the time. They can't get to sleep because they're anxious over things that they shouldn't be anxious about. I'm so anxious about blah 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 blah. It's like, wait a minute, that's not really even occurring. They're really, really just kind of on edge. And Seroquel, I've never seen it prescribed in a way where you take it when you get up. It's always you take it before bed. And the reason is simple, because you're going to be a zombie. You're probably going to wake up groggy from it, as a matter of fact, just because it's such an absolute strong medication. But you'll see that. And we'd be looking for that in any kind of schizophrenia or psychosis would be seeing that kind of antipsychotic medication. What do you want to tell your doctor? You got to be truthful. And sometimes it's really hard for somebody who has a psychotic condition or schizophrenia or really any severe depression or severe anxiety. The things you have to admit to another person, usually a therapist or a psychiatrist or a psychologist, the things you have to admit are incredibly embarrassing. They're incredibly disturbing. I heard my grandmother talking to me last night. Oh, okay. Well, what did she say? Wait. I heard my grandmother talking to me last night, and she died 15 years ago. Oh, okay. Those are the kinds of things that you would hear from somebody with schizophrenia or psychosis. And that's the kind of stuff that you'd have to tell, what we're expecting to see in the medical records. That's what you would be telling your provider. I can't shut my mind off. I'm up for 3 days. People with a bipolar condition, most of the time in bipolar, that just means they're really, really high, anxious, on edge, or they're really, really low, all the way down to, wanting to harm themselves. That's bipolar. We see low, 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 bipolar, low, 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 bipolar, low, low. We rarely see bipolar, and my goodness, they're in a manic state. But somebody with psychosis in a manic state wouldn't sleep for 3 or 4 days. They're wired. Their minds, and it's horrible on the body. Your body's, begging you to sleep, and your mind just won't shut off. We'd see that in case records, and you'd probably be telling your doctor that too. I haven't slept for 3 days. I cannot shut my mind off. So we'd see that. Those are really, they're not common as far as how many we see, but when we do see somebody with schizophrenia with a diagnosis, bona fide diagnosis of schizophrenia or psychosis, again, I almost always see that they've had at least one inpatient stay. They've been institutionalized at least once in the last 2 or 3 years, and they're being prescribed medication that turns them into a zombie. And my argument is, they're not, in a psychotic episode now. They're on medication, but the medication is so stout that you certainly wouldn't trust them to make decisions in a workplace. You wouldn't trust them to be safe in a workplace. You wouldn't trust them to make sure other people are safe in the workplace. I can make a really good argument on that, and that's what we'd be looking for.
If you have a question about your disability case, give us a call at 615-453-9151 Monday through Friday, or click the link in the description of this video.